Not every spiritual message comes from God. In 1 John chapter 4, verses 1 through 6, John gives believers a test, a timeless test, to distinguish truth from deception. He doesn't tell the believers to evaluate teachers and influencers by their sincerity or their eloquence or the number of people who are listening to them or even supernatural claims. Instead, he directs them to look at one simple thing. What do these people say about Jesus Christ? That's the big test. So let's start out by reading verse 1 from 1 John chapter 4 from the English Standard Version. Beloved, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they are from God. For many false prophets have gone out into the world. Again, he calls his readers beloved. It's a pastoral, affectionate form of address. He's not slamming them for bad behavior. He's encouraging them and providing guidance for dealing with a difficult issue. He tells them not to believe every spirit, but rather, or instead, they should test the spirits. Test them for what? Specifically, John says, to see if they are from God. Why are we talking about spirits at all? It's important to remember that when this and all the New Testament documents were written, they had no chapter and verse divisions, and they would be read aloud straight through from beginning to end. And what we call chapter 3 ended with the assurance that God abides with us by means of the Spirit he has given us. So spirits from God or elsewhere is not a new topic in the letter, but continues the theme from the preceding verse. Then John does his readers a great service. He tells them why this is an issue, because there are many false prophets in the world, just like he earlier said, there are many antichrists in the world. And as we'll see in the next few verses, these false prophets and antichrists have a key characteristic in common. Let's move on to verses 2 and 3. By this you know the Spirit of God. Every spirit that confesses that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is from God, and every spirit that does not confess Jesus is not from God. This is the spirit of the Antichrist, which you heard was coming and now is in the world already. There's so much to see here. John returns to the issue that's plaguing the churches to whom he is writing: false claims about Jesus. How can you tell if a person is speaking by the Spirit of God versus some other spirit? Do they confess, meaning agree with the truth, that Jesus is the Christ, God's anointed Messiah, and that he has come in the flesh? There were two basic forms of conflict about Jesus in the early church. One said that he was just a person, a good teacher, and not the Messiah, and certainly not God's own son. The other said that Jesus was a spiritual being, sort of like an angel, and not really human at all. John incorporated both of these claims into his spirit test. By calling him Jesus Christ, John is requiring the acknowledgement that Jesus is the Messiah of God. So anyone who refers to Jesus as not the Christ fails the test. And by including the acknowledgement that Jesus has come in the flesh, he requires recognition of the full humanity of Jesus. Anyone speaking with the Spirit of God within him or her confesses or agrees to both these things according to John. But on the other hand, anyone who does not confess Jesus in both these ways, as the Christ and as being fully human, is not from God. And then John says something amazing. He says, this is the spirit of the Antichrist. If you watch the video about the identity of the many antichrists that had popped up in the churches, you'll remember that John didn't say the Antichrist is coming, but Antichrist comes, signaling an attitude toward Christ rather than one specific person. But now, when he's contrasting with the Spirit of God that the believers have received, John speaks of the spirit of the Antichrist, which is speaking through the little antichrists in the community. So those who confess Jesus is the Christ are showing the Spirit of God in themselves, and those denying that Jesus is the Christ and denying that he's fully human are showing the spirit of the Antichrist in themselves. That is a pretty huge deal, and that's the test that John has laid out for believers to apply to those in their midst. What's the test? What are they saying about Jesus? On to verse 4. Little children, you are from God and have overcome them, for he who is in you is greater than he who is in the world. He switched from beloved back to little children, and he wants these spiritual youngsters to take heart. Even though the world is full of people with the spirit of the Antichrist in them, and there are even some of them in the church, the spirit who is in you is greater than the spirit who is in them. Even more importantly, he says, you are from God and have overcome them. The verb overcome is in the perfect tense, meaning that the overcoming has already happened and the results of that overcoming still stand. They don't need to try to overcome those other people. It's already done. They are already God's children and they already have His Spirit in them. Now we get to the contrast in verse 5. They are from the world, therefore they speak from the world, and the world listens to them. So they, the antichrists and false prophets, are not from God. They speak from the world, and they are heard by the world. But John's audience isn't of the world. John's audience is from God and have overcome the world in Christ. And now John wraps it up tight with verse 6. We are from God. Whoever knows God listens to us. Whoever is not from God does not listen to us. By this we know the spirit of truth and the spirit of error. Did you notice the switch? John had been talking to them in the second person plural, you, but now he's switched back to the first person plural, we. He's either simply including himself together with the believers to whom he's writing, or he's referring back to himself and the other apostles who are the people who introduced the message about Jesus to his readers. I think that's the more likely scenario. Why? Because if we look at what he's writing here, he's dividing the community into two different groups. The people who listen to and believe the apostolic message, and the others. And that message was all about Jesus as the Christ, the Messiah of God, who was also God's Son, who came into the world in the flesh as a real living human being, but was more than just a human being. The ones with the Antichrist spirit, they don't listen to that message, they don't believe that message, and they certainly don't confess that message. They don't agree with that message. And then John's coup de grace that he gave was that that's how you can differentiate the Spirit of God from the spirit of error, the spirit of truth, and the spirit of Antichrist. If you want to know where they're coming from, just look at what they have to say about Jesus. That's the test. That's how you can tell. If they're not proclaiming the same Jesus that John and the other apostles proclaimed, the one that they saw and heard and touched with their own hands from the beginning, that original gospel Jesus that the apostles brought to the world, then it's a figment of the spirit of Antichrist. It's not the real Jesus. That's John's argument here. Next time, John's going to switch to his other major theme here, how the believers should treat one another as a sign of whether or not the Spirit is abiding in them or some other spirit may be abiding in them. Thanks for watching. I hope you're enjoying these videos, and I hope you'll share it with somebody today.